My name is Sienna Marsh, and I'm 34 years old. If you'd driven past my life a few months ago, you probably would have thought, she's fine, she's safe, she's got it together. Small one-bedroom apartment with plants that somehow stayed alive despite my uneven watering schedule. A hatchback that wasn't glamorous but always started, even on the coldest mornings. Auto pay on every bill. A retirement account I actually contributed to. I built that life brick by boring brick, spreadsheet by spreadsheet, one practical decision at a time. I was the sensible one. The friend who shows up with jumper cables when your battery dies. The one who has a spare charger, painkillers, and an emergency granola bar in her bag at all times. People said it like a compliment, but lately it had started to feel like a label you slap on a storage bin. Practical, stackable, forgettable. My boyfriend Ethan Caldwell was the opposite of a storage bin. He was 33, charming in that polished, easy way that makes servers linger on his side of the table 2 seconds too long. He worked in corporate communications for a tech startup. Translation, he talked for a living, and people listened. Ethan came from money. Not billionaire yacht money, but country club summers and private school uniforms money. His parents had a house with a name instead of an address. I grew up in the kind of neighborhood where the biggest flex was having a reliable washing machine. We fit together in that strange way opposites sometimes do. He liked that I grounded him. I liked that he pulled me into rooms I never would have walked into alone. At least, that's what I thought was happening. My own work isn't flashy. I consult for companies on sustainable development and environmental impact reduction. It's niche, technical. The kind of thing that makes people's eyes glaze over if I talk about it too long at parties. Ethan knew what I did, but he never seemed particularly interested in the details. At events, he'd introduce me with a breezy, "This is my girlfriend Sienna, she does environmental sustainability stuff," and then pivot the conversation back to whatever executive he was trying to impress. I told myself it didn't bother me, until the night it very much did. The incident happened on a Saturday evening in early September. Ethan had been invited to a dinner party at the home of Richard and Patricia Carrington. In his world, the Carringtons were a big deal. Richard was a venture capitalist. Patricia sat on several nonprofit boards. Their estate in the suburbs hosted the sort of gatherings people pretended to be casual about, but obsessively angled to attend. Ethan had been talking about getting in front of the Carringtons for months. He bought a new suit, got his hair cut a little sharper than usual, spent a solid 15 minutes deciding between two watches that looked identical to me. With me, the concern was simpler. "You're wearing what?" he asked when I stepped out of my bedroom. I'd chosen a dark green dress that hit just below the knee, structured enough to be formal, soft enough that I didn't feel like I was wearing armor. "Is there a problem?" I asked. He hesitated, just long enough to sting. "No, it's fine. Never mind. We're running late." We drove in silence for about 10 minutes. Ethan reached over and turned the volume all the way down. "Sienna," he said in that careful tone people use right before they say something awful and pretend it's reasonable. "I need you to do me a favor tonight." "Okay," I said slowly. "What kind of favor?" He exhaled. "Just try not to embarrass me." I stared at him. I actually thought I'd misheard. "What? It's just—" He glanced over at me, then back at the road. "These people are way above your level. They're not going to want to hear about soil erosion or carbon offsets or whatever you're working on this week. Just smile, be polite, let me handle the conversations." There it was, neat and sharp, like a blade sliding between ribs. Above my level, I repeated, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "That's what you think." He shifted in his seat. "You know what I mean. They live in a different world, Sienna. I just don't want you to get too technical or go off on a tangent about sustainability. It won't land with this crowd." "So you're worried I'll bore them," I said. "I'm worried you'll make it harder for me to build the relationships I need," he snapped, then immediately softened. "Look, I'm under a lot of pressure. This dinner could open doors for me. Can you please just follow my lead?" I turned my face toward the window so he wouldn't see the way my eyes were stinging. "These people are way above your level. Not I'm nervous. Not I really want to make a good impression. No, it was about levels. His, mine. The invisible line he assumed ran between us. And suddenly, Every moment he'd cut off my attempts to explain my work at parties. Every time he translated my job as something vaguer and smaller, lined up in my head like evidence. What he didn't know was that Richard Carrington had emailed me 3 weeks earlier. One of Richard's partners had heard me speak on a panel about sustainable investment strategy. They'd reached out to see if I'd be open to consulting on a new initiative. Since then, Richard and I had had 2 calls and 1 video meeting. He had invited me to this dinner specifically to introduce me to a handful of people who might want to work with me. I'd mentioned in passing that my boyfriend had also been invited. Perfect. It'll be nice to put a face to the name, he'd said. I hadn't told Ethan because the project was still in early negotiations, and I don't like to talk about deals until the ink is dry. But also, he never asked about my day beyond, anything interesting happen while scrolling through emails? So I let him drive us to the Carrington estate, believing he was the one on trial. We pulled up around 6:45 p.m. The house was everything he described. Massive, all clean lines and glass and stone, manicured lawns, valet attendants in black, warm light spilling from tall windows. Ethan checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusted his tie, then looked at me. Just remember what I said, okay? Follow my lead. I smiled. It probably didn't reach my eyes. Sure. A server met us at the door and led us through the house. We stepped out onto the terrace where about 30 people were mingling with drinks. My gaze skimmed the space and landed on Richard near the bar, talking to a small group. He turned slightly, his eyes swept the terrace, and our gazes met. His face lit up. Okay, Ethan murmured, straightening his shoulders. Just let me. Before he could finish, I felt his arm tense as Richard excused himself from the group and walked directly toward us. Ethan stepped forward, his hand already extended. Mr. Carrington, thank you so much for... Richard walked right past Ethan's outstretched hand and took mine instead, shaking it warmly. Sienna, he said with a smile that was all genuine relief. Finally, we've been waiting to meet you in person. Patricia's been talking about your proposal all week. I watched Ethan's face drain of color in my peripheral vision. It's great to finally meet you too, Richard, I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. Thank you for the invitation. Are you kidding? He said. Having you here is half the point of tonight. He looked over at Ethan as if just remembering he existed. And you must be Ethan. Sienna mentioned you'd be joining us. Wonderful to have you. Ethan's hand, still hovering awkwardly between us, finally found something to do. He shook Richard's hand, swallowing hard. Yes, thank you for having us, he managed. Richard clapped a hand lightly on my shoulder. Come on, Sienna, let me introduce you to a few people who've been dying to talk to you about this sustainable investment pivot. As I let myself be led across the terrace, I glanced back over my shoulder just long enough to see Ethan standing there alone. His expression a mix of shock and something that looked a lot like panic. In that moment, it hit me with cold, perfect clarity. The man who just told me not to embarrass him was about to spend an entire evening realizing he'd been catastrophically wrong about who was above whose level. Richard moved through the crowd like a host and a spotlight at the same time, and I was the thing he was shining it on. Everyone, this is Sienna Marsh, he said. She's the consultant I told you about, the brains behind that sustainability proposal you all pretended to read. People laughed. A woman in a sleek navy dress stuck out her hand. I didn't pretend, she said. I actually read it twice. I'm Lena Park. I run an ESG-focused fund. Your section on supply chain emissions reporting? Brutal in a good way. Thank you, I said. I'm glad it was brutal enough. Another man introduced himself as heading up a family office. Someone else chimed in about being curious how to phase out fossil-heavy positions. The questions weren't polite fluff. They were specific, detailed. I'd prepared for these conversations, but I hadn't prepared for how it would feel to be treated like the reason the room was tilting. Every few minutes, I felt Ethan's presence hover at the edge of my vision, like a satellite trying to find its orbit. He laughed a little too loudly at a joke he probably didn't fully hear. He slipped an arm around my waist once, squeezing my side like a subtle reminder. We're together, remember? 2 hours earlier, he'd been worried I'd drag him down. Now he was hanging on like I was the elevator. At some point, Patricia Carrington materialized at my elbow, a petite woman in her 60s with sharp eyes. There she is, she said. The woman who made my board realized we can't just slap leaves on our logo and call it sustainable. Come with me, Sienna. I have questions. A lot of questions. She steered me to a quieter corner near the terrace railing. We dove into a 20-minute discussion about timelines, phased reporting, stakeholder buy-in. It was the kind of conversation I live for. When we finally came up for air, Patricia tilted her head. "You're a good fit for this," she said. "Richard was right to push for you." The night blurred into a series of introductions and questions. I kept catching snippets of Ethan floating around. At one point, he sidled up to me between conversations, hand resting on the small of my back. "Everyone's really interested in your work," he said, his smile tight. "This is huge, babe." "Yeah," I replied. "It's a big opportunity." Ethan's fingers pressed slightly harder. "We should talk about how I can help you leverage this. PR positioning, follow-up strategies. I've got ideas." Of course he did. Richard reappeared then, clinking his glass lightly. "All right, folks, dinner's ready." There was a collective shuffle as people drifted toward the dining room. As we walked, Ethan leaned close to my ear. "Maybe you could mention what I do when you talk to people from comms-heavy firms," he murmured. "You know, if it comes up." I looked at him. "The way you mention what I do at your events?" His jaw flickered. He didn't answer. Place cards waited at each seat. I found my name halfway down on one side, between Patricia and a man whose card read Lang, Meridian Renewables. Ethan's place card was 4 seats away, next to someone's husband whose tag just said Tom, Insurance. Ethan glanced from his card to mine, then back again. For a second, something raw sparked in his eyes. Then he smoothed it over. "Great spot," he said. "You'll have a lot of good conversations." "You too," I replied. We both knew it wasn't the same thing. Dinner itself was a blur of courses and questions. I answered as best I could. Humor when I could get away with it, directness when I couldn't. With every nod and follow-up question, something in my chest loosened. I belonged here. After dessert, Richard stood and tapped his glass. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he said. "Patricia and I have been talking for a while about the direction of our investments, and we've been fortunate enough to connect with someone who's going to help us navigate that." He gave a little gesture toward me. "This is Sienna Marsh. She's working with us on a comprehensive strategy to overhaul how we approach sustainability across our portfolio. If you're interested in similar initiatives, I'd highly recommend getting on her calendar before we book all her time." A small wave of polite laughter moved through the room, then applause. Heat crawled up my neck. I forced myself to meet the attention instead of shrinking from it. I glanced down the table. Ethan's expression was complicated. Pride, maybe, but layered with something sour and tight. The look of someone who just realized the ladder he thought he was climbing isn't even leaning against the right wall. The party wound down around 10:30 p.m. A few people pressed cards into my hand. "If you're taking on new clients, I'd love to set up a call," Lena said. Ethan stood slightly behind me, smiling, nodding, saying almost nothing. Richard appeared one last time. "Sienna," he said, "let's get a meeting on the books for next week to finalize scope and next steps." "I'd like that," I said. He hesitated, then glanced at Ethan with a polite smile. "And you two should come by for dinner sometime, just the 4 of us." We said our final goodnights and stepped out into the cooler night air. Once we were inside the car, doors closed and the estate receding in the rearview mirror, silence settled between us like a third passenger. 10 minutes passed. 15. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said quietly, eyes fixed on the road. "That you knew Richard Carrington." There it was. The first crack in whatever we were pretending was still intact. The question hung in the air between us, quiet but sharp enough to cut. I waited a beat before answering. "You never asked," I said. He let out a bitter little laugh. "Oh, come on. That's not fair." "It's the truth. Sienna, you had multiple meetings with Richard Carrington. Multiple, and you didn't think that was worth mentioning." I turned my head to look at him. "Tonight, before the dinner, you told me I was going to embarrass you." "That's not what," he started. "You said those people were above my level." He stared straight ahead. I didn't mean it like that. How else could you have meant it? He didn't answer. I didn't tell you, I continued, because you never showed any interest. Any time I tried to explain what I do, you cut me off or changed the subject. I didn't hide anything from you. I just stopped volunteering details that you clearly didn't care about. That's not true, he muttered. I care about what you do. You called it environmental stuff. He flinched. I was stressed, he said. Tonight was important. I said something stupid because I was nervous. You said what you really felt, I corrected softly. And then you got nervous when you realized it might hurt you. He turned to me then briefly, eyes wide, hurt, defensive. That's not fair. Isn't it? His grip on the steering wheel tightened. I didn't expect everyone to be so into your work. I didn't know you were doing something on that level. My chest tightened. There it was. The thing he didn't say but absolutely meant. He hadn't known I was valuable, so he hadn't treated me like I was. So the problem, I said slowly, isn't that you underestimated me. It's that you underestimated me in front of people you wanted to impress. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The rest of the drive passed in heavy silence. When he pulled up in front of my apartment, he didn't turn to face me. Sienna, he said finally, voice cracking just a little. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said those things. There was a time when that would have softened me, but tonight, the apology felt like a bandage on something fractured much deeper. I hear you, I said quietly. Good night, Ethan. I got out and walked inside without looking back. The next morning, I woke up to an essay-length text from him. I'm so sorry about last night. I was overwhelmed. I'm proud of you. I want to understand your work better. Can we talk today? Please don't let one stupid moment ruin everything. I stared at the message for a long time. For a moment, I wondered if I was being unfair, dramatic, overreacting. But then I remembered the look on his face in the car, the panic when he realized I mattered more in that room than he did. The way he clung to me all night, not out of affection, but possession. Respect that comes only after someone becomes useful isn't respect. It's opportunism dressed up in apology. So I texted back the gentlest version of the truth I could manage. We can talk, but I need some space today. He replied instantly. Whatever you need, just don't shut me out. But space didn't fix anything. Over the next week, Ethan transformed into a man I barely recognized. Suddenly, he wanted to know everything about the Carrington project. How many hours will it take? What's the budget? Shouldn't you have some PR strategy lined up? I can help you pitch this to other firms. This could be huge for us. Us, a word he hadn't used much before. He started introducing me differently at events. No more, she does environmental stuff. Now it was, this is Sienna. She's consulting for the Carringtons on a major sustainability overhaul. His friends, some who had barely acknowledged me before, started sending LinkedIn requests, messaging me with questions, asking if I was hiring. It wasn't subtle. It was a feeding frenzy. Every time Ethan saw me talking to someone new, his eyes lit up, not with pride, but calculation. He wasn't proud of me. He was proud to be attached to me, like I was a new status symbol. Our first real fight happened 10 days after the dinner party. We were in his kitchen chopping vegetables for stir-fry. Richard is speaking at the Green Horizons conference next month, he said casually. We should go. I'm not planning to attend, I replied. He froze. Why not? I don't need to be there. I have client meetings that week. But this is perfect exposure for you, and I could network with some of the communications directors there. It's a win-win. Win-win for who, Ethan? I said, keeping my voice calm. I'm not going for exposure. My work doesn't depend on being seen. It depends on results. You're being short-sighted. My knife paused mid-slice. Excuse me. He sighed in frustration. You're finally in rooms with important people, Sienna. You should maximize it. I'm not a commodity to maximize. He slammed the knife down. Why are you being like this? Like what? Defensive? Ungrateful? I'm trying to help you. No, I said, finally meeting his eyes. You're trying to benefit from me. That's different. Color rose in his face. That's not true. Isn't it? I asked softly. His voice sharpened. You're holding that one comment in the car over my head forever, aren't you? It wasn't one comment, I said. It was everything it revealed. He stared at me, breathing hard. Some truths don't need to be shouted to be devastating. That night, I went home early, and for the first time, I didn't kiss him goodbye. 3 weeks after the Carrington dinner party, the truth finally surfaced between us. We were sitting in Ethan's living room on a Sunday afternoon. A mug of untouched tea sat on the coffee table. "Sienna," he said, voice tight, "are you even trying anymore? It feels like you're punishing me." I looked at him for a long moment. Really looked. "I'm not punishing you," I said softly. "I'm realizing who you are." He blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you respect me now because I'm useful. Because I impress the right people. Because I walked into a room and became valuable to the crowd you care about. That's not—" "It is," I interrupted gently, "and you know it." He stood abruptly, pacing in front of the fireplace. I apologized for what I said. I admitted I was wrong. "What more do you want from me?" "I want respect that isn't conditional," I said. "Respect that doesn't change based on the size of the room." He stopped pacing, slowly turned. "You're telling me," he said, voice trembling between anger and fear, "that you're ending this over one bad night." A sad, tired kind of clarity washed through me. "It wasn't one night," I whispered. "It was a pattern, and the dinner party just made it impossible to pretend anymore." His throat bobbed. "We can fix this. Just tell me what you want me to change." I shook my head. "I don't want to teach someone how to respect me," I said. "If it's not there already, it won't last." He inhaled sharply. Then he said the thing I think he regretted the moment it left his mouth. "You're throwing away the best relationship you'll ever have." I stood up. "Then you should be grateful," I said quietly, "because now you can go find someone who actually meets your level." I picked up my bag, took one last look at the life we'd tried to build, and walked out. He didn't follow me. The first few weeks were strange, quiet but not lonely, heavy but not suffocating. Work, on the other hand, thrived. The Carrington project expanded. Richard connected me with 3 new clients. I brought on a part-time assistant. I signed 2 contracts with renewable energy firms, moved into a better office with windows instead of buzzing fluorescent lights. Success didn't fix heartbreak, but it did remind me that the version of myself Ethan saw wasn't the full picture. About a month after the breakup, I ran into Richard downtown. "How's everything going?" he asked. "Good," I said. "Busy. The project's moving faster than expected." "I'm not surprised." He took a sip of his drink. "Patricia says you're one of the sharpest people we've brought in on anything. How's Ethan doing? Haven't seen him around." I hesitated, then said, "We broke up." Richard nodded slowly. "Ah, I'm sorry to hear that." "It was the right choice," I said. He leaned back, tapping his fingers on the table thoughtfully. "Between you and me," he said, voice lowering conspiratorially, "Patricia didn't think he was right for you." "Really?" Richard chuckled. "She said he seemed more interested in who you knew than who you were, and Patricia is rarely wrong about people." For a moment, something inside me settled into place like a puzzle piece finally clicking. "I think she was right," I said. A few weeks later, I saw Ethan again at a large networking event. I spotted him across the room, standing beside a woman in a sleek black dress. She was animated, gesturing with her wine glass, and Ethan was nodding vigorously, smile wide. Our eyes met for a split second. His expression flickered. Surprise? Embarrassment? Regret? Maybe something softer beneath it. I gave him a small, polite nod. Then I turned away. That night he texted me. "It was good to see you. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I'm sorry for how things ended. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate you when I had the chance." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I set my phone down and didn't reply. Some doors don't need dramatic slamming. They just stay closed. About a month after that, I met Daniel Rivera, a middle school science teacher with soft eyes and a laugh that landed in the center of my chest like warmth. The kind of person who listened, really listened, even when the conversation wasn't glamorous. He thought what I did was cool. Not impressive, not prestigious, not strategically advantageous. Just cool. He asked questions because he was genuinely curious, not because he wanted to drop my name into rooms. When he introduced me to his friends, it wasn't, "This is Sienna. She consults for big investors." It was, "This is Sienna. She's amazing." The difference felt like oxygen, like stepping into a room with windows after years of breathing recycled air. Sometimes when I can't sleep, my mind drifts back to that car ride. The music fading, Ethan's careful tone, the sentence that broke everything open. These people are way above your level. Once it crushed me. Now it feels like a moment the universe held up like a mirror, saying, "Look, don't pretend you didn't see this." Richard once asked me what I learned from the whole experience. I told him, "You can't build a relationship with someone who only respects you when you're useful." He nodded like he'd heard that lesson before, many times from many people. I'm just grateful I learned it at 34 instead of 44 or 54, with a mortgage or children or a decade of being quietly diminished. The Carrington dinner party will always be a strange, perfect turning point in my life. The night Ethan's mask slipped, and the night mine finally came off too. The one that had convinced me for years that being the sensible one meant accepting less. It doesn't. I deserve respect on my worst day, not just on the nights when powerful people clap for me over dessert.